Welcome back, film fans. This is Let's Be Real, Brad. Today on the channel, I want to talk about the most anticipated movie of 2021 in a spoiler-heavy fashion, and that is Spider-Man No Way Home. Spider-Man No Way Home has to be one of the most highly anticipated movies I have ever had in my entire life, and I know I'm pretty young. I'm around 22, so cut me some slack here, but ever since Avengers Endgame, we haven't had a movie that people have just gone so crazy over. You could argue Star Wars Rise of Skywalker, but people haven't really loved that trilogy, and everyone knew Endgame was going to be amazing. So now that we have Spider-Man No Way Home, and we have seen the trailers, we've seen the posters, and people are trying to spoil it all over the internet because they don't care about surprises, we have been so excited to see this epic fan event movie, and that seems like that's why people love going to cinemas for fan event movies like this. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I was really excited too to watch it with a crowd and the best speakers and this massive screen, because I love the cinema, and seeing Spider-Man and all my favorite characters was just a blessing. And I have to say that I really enjoyed this movie quite a bit, but the only way I felt like I could talk about this movie in the best and most critical and most interesting way possible is in a spoiler heavy way, because some of my critiques that I have with this movie truly do involve spoilers, and there's just no way around it with almost not hinting at it, and someone gets mad because they might felt like I was hinting at it in my spoiler-free video. And I just know that people are going to see this movie no matter what. They don't care if on Rotten Tomatoes it'll have a 71 or a 95%. They just want to see this movie. People are excited. This is going to be the most highly anticipated. This is going to be one of the highest grossing movies of the year so far. Probably gonna have the biggest opening weekend for sure. So let's just dive right into the spoiler heavy video, because there's going to be a ton of spoilers here. But the way I want to do this review is that to have the spoilers add to my critiques of the movie, and not necessarily just be like, oh man, I really like the action scene, oh I mean I really like that nostalgic throwback. This is not going to be one of those videos. This is going to be about the movie itself, and try to be a professional critic as much as I can be, even though I would love to fanboy about this movie and itch my nose, because that's something I do when I get really excited and my nose gets all pink. But you didn't need to know that. So let's just dive right into the movie itself and why I really love Spider-Man No Way Home. Spider-Man No Way Home is exactly what I wanted this movie to be, but not just as a comic book fan or a Spider-Man fan, but as a movie fan, because I was so nervous that this movie was going to be filled to the brim with just so many references and throwbacks to the other movies, and I obviously want to see it because I'm a big Spider-Man fan. I love the MCU, but at the same time, I am a big movie fan, and when you start to do those kind of stuff, it bogs the movie down. It doesn't make it as interesting. But what Jon Watts and this creative team decided to go for was to make this an actual Tom Holland Spider-Man movie, and I thought that was the best thing that they could have done with this movie, because they could have just had references here and there, and it would have just not made the movie all that interesting. One of the aspects that I love so much about this movie is that they make Tom Holland's version of Spider-Man so ridiculously interesting. I know people have criticized this Tom Holland Spider-Man because he lives in the shadow of Tony Stark and he has all these Stark suits of Spider-Man. I completely get that, but I felt like if you went back and rewatched all these movies in a row, I think that was the point of it. It was his character arc. This is a different version of Peter Parker than we've had in the other two franchises, so I was really excited to see where they're going to take this version of Spider-Man, and the way that they finished off his character arc for this trilogy was absolutely fantastic and very fulfilling as a fan, but as someone who loves movies. And I think that being able to have Peter Parker make a lot of mistakes, and it feels like he's made a lot more mistakes than the other Spider-Mans in the other movies, that's what makes him more interesting, because he feels like a flawed young 16-year-old kid, or however old he is. It just feels like this Spider-Man is a lot more inexperienced, and he isn't truly Spider-Man yet, because he's still living in the shadow of Tony Stark. He still is not understanding how to separate his regular life as a high schooler and being Spider-Man. And this movie is able to explore that in the most emotional and best way possible. And that's the next part I want to get into, is the emotional aspects. To me, this might be one of the most emotionally moving Spider-Man movies I have ever seen. Spider-Man 2 gets close to that, but this movie found a way to top it in the best way possible because I was emotionally wrapped into this movie. I cried a few times, especially because there is a major death scene that happens at some point in the movie, and that is Aunt May's death. And that, to me, broke me so much. And I think a lot of people in the cinema were crying as well. And she was the Uncle Ben to Peter because she's always had a strong role in all these movies. And I always like the change that they made to Aunt May. Obviously having Marissa Tomei because she's an amazing actress and she's just awesome. And I like how she feels more involved in this franchise and just feels like a bigger part to this Spider-Man's life. This scene also added to Tom Holland's version of Spider-Man as well because it made him angry, it made him bitter. He hasn't had that at any point in these movies. I think we all just kind of assumed that Uncle Ben did die, but they've never brought up Uncle Ben. And now that we see that this is the version of Uncle Ben, this is the emotional arc that this character needs that all the other Spider-Man have. And when the other Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield go to talk to him about that on top of the rooftop, I thought that was a really great scene because they feel like they're mentors to him, that they've been doing this for a long time, and they see that within this Peter Parker. And it's really nice because they're essentially all the same person, but they are all different in the ways that they've handled it in their own universe. And I thought that was really interesting, that mentor relationship. Another aspect I really enjoy about this movie, which is something I've already talked about, is that this version of Peter Parker makes a lot of mistakes, and essentially he screws everything up in this movie, and he deals with a lot of consequences. And I think that is so interesting, even though we may get mad at Peter. And I thought that the way this movie wrapped was absolutely perfect in the last 15 minutes because, you know, his consequences is that no one knows who he is anymore. His aunt doesn't know him because she died. His best friend Ned and his love of his life MJ won't know who he is anymore. And that is really sad and depressing to think about, considering that he's going to live in the same world and still see them all around. And I can't even imagine how difficult that would be. So in the final moments of the movie, when he goes to the coffee shop to talk to MJ and Ned, he had this paper written out like, I'm just gonna tell them everything. I'm just gonna tell them, and that everything will be all fine. But I think in reality, this was such a great scene because he doesn't do that, and they don't just say, "Well, I'm doing this for a reason, so now I can be fully Spider-Man." But this was what he needed. He feels like a young adult taking on the world. And I am way more interested to see what they do with this character and the other characters we have in this universe, because this little franchise of these Spider-Man movies have taken a lot of risks, a lot of chances, and they just went all in with this trilogy, and I am really happy with what I got with it. And being able to see Tom Holland's new Spider-Man suit, the one that he constructed, was absolutely beautiful. Another amazing aspect of this movie is how this movie is able to handle these villains. This movie knows that you have seen all these movies and you've just been so excited for it, so you don't really need a deep dive into any of these characters, but it actually works that we get all these characters from all different universes because they're already established and they don't feel like they're shoved in. You're like, okay, who's this guy? Who's this guy? We know who everyone is. And this movie still decides to add a little bit of backstory to people who don't know who these characters are. And they could always go back and watch the other movies. And I think that was a really nice touch because they didn't have to do that, but they were able to do it because this is a well-written movie for the most part, especially when the other Spider-Man showed up. Because if you hadn't seen those movies, you'd be like, oh yeah, they're just other Spider-Man. But we do get a sense of their different personalities and how each Spider-Man's a little different, and a lot of the inside jokes were really funny in this movie, and they didn't feel like they went overboard. At least one or two times I feel like they kind of pushed the joking a little bit too far. But the best aspect about this movie is the story. The story is the one aspect that this trailer and all the crazy people on Twitter haven't actually spoiled, and I love this story so damn much because it has such a great message. It embodies what Spider-Man is, trying to help people, trying to give people second chances. And it also goes into the fact that if you watch the other movies, Spider-Man isn't trying to kill the enemies. He's trying to help them. If you notice in every battle, he always tries to talk to them and be like, hey, you shouldn't do this. Hey, Eddie, get away from that. Hey, Doc, let's just leave that thing in the water. Let's just get rid of it. And the villains just sometimes don't care, or they still try to attack Peter, and he has to do what he's got to do. And this movie encompasses what makes Spider-Man one of the best heroes of all time is because he has the heart. And the story of this movie is that he's trying to get all of these villains and go against Doctor Strange's order and trying to cure them all and make this serum that feels like it was pretty rushed and very convenient for the movie, but I didn't really care because I found that it was really interesting. This movie could have easily been that these villains just come here and they just destroy the world, and he has to fight them, and then they take over his family and his friends, and he has to deal with Spider-Man to help. But it's not exactly the case because these villains aren't just villains to take over the world. These are well-written characters that we've had from other movies, and they're not just big old bad guys. Like, we like seeing Green Goblin, why he does what he does, because he's just a psychopath. He just wants to kill Spider-Man, or Sandman wants to, fight for his daughter and get her money, but he does things in an evil, villainous way. I think that this movie is able to do that in such a great way. I also found the visual effects in this movie to be absolutely stunning, especially because there are so many effects in this movie. This is a very expensive movie, and there's so much visual effects going on almost the entire time, and I thought it looked incredible. And I'm someone who is very nitpicky when it comes to special effects, and I thought it all looked great, especially when you had all the Spider-Man fighting. And I was a little nervous because pretty much all the scenes with Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man, they definitely looked CGI for the most part, because in the original Raimi films, he did most of the stunts. It all looks pretty real. So seeing in this movie was a little strange, but the CGI is so good, you really can't tell, especially because they're all at night. And I thought it was the best way they could do it because there's just special effects all over the place. And I was really impressed with how well polished this movie looks, especially because some of the MCU movies sometimes can look a little average. I'm looking at you, Eternals. I also enjoyed all the costumes in this movie, especially all the new upgrades that they get, especially with Jamie Foxx's Electro, which was definitely the biggest upgrade for sure. And I like how his new costume is somewhat explained, in the movie. And I thought they just didn't do it just because they could. William Dafoe is essentially the main villain of this movie as Green Goblin, and he continues to prove that he's one of my favorite actors working today. Like, honest to God, he is absolutely terrific, and he just goes right back to the villainous Green Goblin that we knew, and he is awesome in this movie. I felt like his character was very important, especially because he kills Aunt May and he poses a true threat to Peter, and I just love every single thing they did with them. Obviously, they gave him that classic suit that he wore in the beginning of, the original Spider-Man movie, but then they changed his costume later on, and that definitely was, made to sell toys and stuff, but it made sense because this Green Goblin is very different. He's just all over the place, and I thought that he had so many mental issues going on with him, and it actually made him a scarier character because he just has nothing to lose at this point. He's in another universe. I also really enjoyed the pacing of this movie, as by the time that we get up to the point where Tom Holland's Spider-Man just loses Aunt May, this movie flies by. This movie clocks in at 2 hours and 30 minutes, and while watching it, I was just saying to myself, this has got to be the fastest 2.5 hour movie I literally have ever seen in my entire life. And I've seen almost 2,000 movies at this point, so that's quite a record. Surprisingly, I actually have maybe one negative that I do have with this movie, and this is something that I think a lot of people will notice. This is the part after when Aunt May dies and Tom Holland's Spider-Man is he's just unknown. He's just going off in his own little world, and the villains just got loose. But then when you have Ned and MJ and they're playing around with Doctor Strange's ring and we get the other Spider-Man, it was really nice to see them and have them team up and talk to each other. But I will admit, the pacing comes to a screeching halt, because then it takes so much time for these characters to team up and fight the villains. I obviously want this because it's very important to the story and for the character development, and it's nice having all these guys talk to each other and what it's like to be Spider-Man. And you obviously have a lot of fun jokes along the way and a ton of throwbacks along the way that everyone in the theater was clapping and laughing, just having a great time watching, because I know I was a part of that for sure. I might have been one of the loudest people there doing it. But at the same time, it takes so long to get to this fight, and some of the jokes just feel like it's just repeating itself over and over again, especially with the web shooting. Like, I get it was funny the first time, but then they go back to that when they're on the Statue of Liberty and they do the jokes again. I know people are just not going to mind it because people are just so excited. They love Spider-Man. They love the throwbacks. But as a movie reviewer, as someone who is trying to be as objective as I possibly can without fanboying, I also found the action sequences in this movie to be so damn fantastic. Visual effects are amazing in these scenes, especially the final fight at the end of the movie that had me on the edge of my seat. It was so well shot, it was so well planned out, and it was fantastic. Especially the final fight between Tom Holland, Peter versus Green Goblin was so damn good. It reminded me heavily of Captain America and Iron Man and Bucky had that fight in Civil War. It was so intense and dark, and when Peter grabs the glider about to stab Green Goblin in the chest with it, and then Peter just holds it up, the other Tobey Maguire Peter, I was just like, wow. Like, it was just so epic, and then he gets stabbed, and I was like, no way. I literally thought he was going to die. The last thing I want to talk about is the two post-credit scenes, with the first one being Eddie and Venom, and they're at a bar, and they're drunk. I thought this scene was really stupid. I thought it was really annoying. It has that same, like, let's just talk about the MCU. Let's just joke about it for people who really don't know what's going on. And you could have cut that one out. I didn't really care for it. And then you had the big one, which was the Doctor Strange 2 Multiverse and Madness movie, whatever it's called. They did a whole trailer for, which was rumored, and it was so awesome and it was so exciting, especially because we got the new evil Doctor Strange from the What If episode 4 episode, I believe. And I knew it was going to come because, you know, Sony and Marvel just can't keep their mouths shut and like, oh, well, what if this is actually going to be connected to the MCU? And I knew they were going to do that because this Doctor Strange is probably the most well-written character out of that whole show. And it's pretty obvious he's just going to show up, and I'm glad he is, and the trailer looked awesome, so I'm super excited for that. So overall, guys, Spider-Man No Way Home was a fantastic and amazing movie that is going to do everything for comic book fans. There are a ton of Easter eggs in this movie. I found this movie to be very engaging, exciting. I love the character arc of Tom Holland's Peter Parker, as it's just solely focused on him, and I thought it was great. The villains are awesome. The callbacks are great. The action scenes are awesome, and I just love that this movie feels so well made and put together with such an awesome story. As a Spider-Man fan, I'm going to be giving this a 10 out of 10, but as a movie fan, a movie lover, and trying to be objective as possible, I'm going to be giving this movie a strong 9 out of 10. Thank you guys for watching my spoiler-heavy review of Spider-Man No Way Home. I want to know down below in the comments section, what did you think of this movie? What are some of your favorite moments of the movie? And do you agree with my small criticism I have with the movie, or did you have any other criticisms that maybe I didn't agree with you, or whatever the case may be? I would love to know about it. But before you check out this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, leave a like if you want to, and ring that notification bell so I can see you all in the following review.